Okay, watch the video real quick. Okay, what do you think that was?
Our immune system.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, it looks like a protozoa, doesn't it? Doesn't that look like a protozoa? And it's moving around.
How is this found?
I don't know. Probably in vitro? I don't know. So crazy. So that's a neutrophil. That's a white blood cell. So very cool. And immunology, when we're starting to look at the immune system is crazy cool and just beyond unreal about how powerful it is. So I think it's really interesting to learn about it. Hopefully it will help you when you get into that section in clinical medicine. Oh my God, I always do this when I watch videos. So I divided up our lectures a little bit differently actually this time than I did last semester. Oh, here it is. Immunology 101. Okay. So I divided it up a little bit differently this time than I have in the past, and the reason I did that is because I was kind of introducing terms as we went along, and I feel like people get lost in the terminology because you're going to learn some new terms. So I did it a little bit differently this semester. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to spend today telling you all about the terms and what they are and what they mean, and then we are going to learn about the innate immune system on Thursday, and then that will be our quiz for next week, will be terms and the innate immune system, and then we're going to do the adaptive immune system the next week. So I thought maybe this would simplify it a little bit. We'll see how it goes. But you know, I love talking about the immune system. The immune system is the most powerful weapon that we have, and we have developed our immune system. Those little neutrophils have been evolving since the beginning of eukaryotic cells, that our different cellular cellular makeup for our immune system is the most powerful weapon, and we've evolved to where we have all these different cell types that have different jobs, and it's pretty incredible. So hopefully you'll think it's interesting, but so this is a picture of, it's like the boy in the bubble, if you guys have ever heard of that. So human beings that are born without an immune system will die. They can't live without an immune system. So the longest living, I think, was 3 years or 4 years that a human can live without an immune system, and they have to live in this environment, and still they can't survive, because they're trying to get rid of fungal spores. They're trying to get rid of everything that's on the plastic and in the plastic and on the bed sheets and every single thing that this human is exposed to. And we can't live without one. So can we live without antibiotics? Yes, but not very long. You know, we lived for millions and millions of years without antibiotics, but it shortened our lifespan, and especially now with how many people there are on the planet, we probably wouldn't live very long, but we can live without all of our pharmaceuticals. We cannot live without an immune system. So our immune system is way more powerful than any of the drugs that we've come up with. And now what's really cool, we can talk about it as you guys progress in your understanding of the immune system, we can talk about how we're trying to use the immune system and manufacture our immune system to attack different things like cancers and stuff like that. So it's a pretty cool area of research. Okay, so it's called SCID, Severe Combined Immunodeficiency Syndrome. 1 to 2 year life expectancy. I think the longest was 4, but don't quote me on that. So these patients can get a bone marrow transplant. We'll talk about what bone marrow transplants are and why and what goes on. But about 70 people per year are born with SCID. Okay, so I showed you what that was. So the immune system is bigger than you think it is. Yes, there are cells that are part of our immune system. We're going to learn about all those cells, but also our body really is a pathogen fighting machine. And it's a significant portion of what our body does. And even though we don't even think about it, we think about our heart rate sometimes, or our heartbeat. We think about our respiratory system sometimes. We might think about things like that, or skeletal system, or muscular system. But you know, you only really think about your immune system when it's not working right? When you're like, oh, my immune system's low, I don't feel good, or I've gotten the flu, or gotten a cold, or whatever it is. That this is a big part of, if you are going to become a clinician, this is a big problem, because so many people are immunocompromised, and so many people are becoming more and more immunocompromised because of their general overall health. So because people have diabetes, or congestive heart failure, or lung issues like COPD, or they have sclerotic plaque in their arteries, and so their circulatory system isn't working well. Whatever their problems are, generally it's diet related, it's lifestyle related, are the reasons that people have a lower immune system. But it's just something to think about, because your patient who is immunocompromised is way more likely to get all kinds of infections from microorganisms, but also, you know, other things like hormone imbalances and all kinds of random stuff. So our immune system is super important. So we're going to start off talking today about organs of the immune system and what they do. So we're going to learn about these, but don't freak out, because actually it's pretty, the immune system, the organs of the immune system are pretty easy to understand, because they all kind of do the same thing. And I'll tell you why. So we have lymph fluid. So I don't know how much, you know, we think about our cardiovascular system, and you probably learn more about that. But, you know, I was never really taught about our lymphatic system and what our lymph fluid does and our lymph vessels do. Well, we have vessels, just like we have blood vessels, that are like tubes, a series of tubes that carry a fluid called lymph fluid. And what lymph fluid is it's like the big Drano system of your body. It drains fluids and pulls fluids out of tissues and cleans them up and spits it back out again. So our body, what it's doing, our lymphatic system, what it's doing is filtering. It's like a big giant filter. So it filters not only pathogens, but also cellular debris, fats or proteins that are broken, and old cells, things like that. Our body produces cells by the trillions, and our body has to get rid of all the old ones. So that's what our lymph system does as well. So our lymphatic vessels are what carry the lymph fluid around the body, and then we have these lymphatic organs, and I'll tell you about what they do. So we'll go through these one by one. This is just a little synopsis. So let's start talking about the spleen. So the spleen, what it does is filter blood. So this pulls out any pathogens, debris, things like that out of the bloodstream. But also what the spleen can do is store and activate white blood cells. So we have white blood cells, or they're called leukocytes, all over our body. Yeah, go ahead.
So in the picture it shows the veins and the arteries are going in and out, but
Yep.
is the lymphatic vessels also have an in and out from the spleen?
Yes. So it does, yes. It also drains in and out of the spleen.
So
yes.
it's separate and different
Separate.
tubes, but they go into.
Yes,
Okay.
great.
Thanks.
So so what our spleen does, so what our body does, we have white blood cells everywhere. White blood cells, now that we're fancy, we're gonna call them leukocytes. That's what scientists, human biologists call white blood cells. So leuko means like milky or something like that, and cyte means cell. So they're white blood cells, leukocytes. Let me just keep track of our terms as we go along. And what else did we introduce so far? That's it. Okay. So what our body does is we have white blood cells everywhere, but our body is really amazing in that way that what it's going to do is pull out the junk, pull out all the lymph, the fluid that it's going to vacuum, and run it through the filter instead of having to have the filters all over the body, which we do also. But we have these little organs that act as the filter that we're going to run the lymph fluid through. So that's what we're going to do with the spleen, is we run the lymph through the spleen and we activate and store white blood cells in that organ. So we'll know more about the activation of leukocytes as we move on. So lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are these tiny little bean-shaped organs, and you can feel it, right? When your lymph nodes are swollen. That's what lymph nodes are. And why are they swollen? Because generally there's a pathogen in there. Because our body has pulled that pathogen from somewhere in the body and has filtered it through the lymph nodes. And so the lymph nodes are going to start, the white blood cells are going to start accumulating. The white blood cells are going to start activating in the lymph nodes. And so that's why lymph nodes become swollen, is because our body is trying to filter the pathogen through them. And there's lymph nodes all over the body. And what they are is just these little clusters of organs. You'll learn more about it if you get into immunology. They each have their own special little section of what they do and how they help the white blood cells to do their job. But we could just keep it simple and just know that we're going to filter our lymph fluid through our lymph nodes. And what the point of lymph nodes is to activate and store white blood cells. Same as a spleen, right? So this one's a little bit different than the spleen and the lymph nodes. This is called the thymus gland. So a lot of my students get confused between the thyroid and the thymus. The thyroid is here in the throat, is up in front of the trachea, but the thymus is more towards the heart. It's between the lungs. And the thymus, what it is it helps to mature T cells. So T cells, that's why it starts with a T, they're in the thymus, and T cells will migrate here and they will activate. So they'll become more mature, actually. And I'll go through what maturity means and activation means as we go along. Yeah.
T cells originate in BM, that means bone marrow?
Bone marrow,
Okay.
yes. So I'll talk about that, about how white blood cells are made and where they're made. I'll talk about that when we get to that. So the thymus is in babies is huge, and the thymus gets smaller and smaller as we age, because it becomes more efficient, but also our babies' bodies are inundated with pathogens, right? They've just woken up to a world of every grass, hay, dust mites, every bacteria, every virus, every fungus, and everything that's in our environment. The baby has to start developing a white blood cell line that will attack every single one of those pathogens, or just environmental things. So the thymus is a very important organ. So I don't want you to know this, I just thought it was interesting, is athymia is a baby that's born without a thymus. And so T cells it's a huge problem with T cells. What other infection have we figured out where a patient has a problem with T cells?
HIV.
HIV, awesome, yes. So HIV is a problem with T cells, and so it almost like kind of mimics what's going on here. You'll figure out what is going on with the T cells and why it's a problem for those T cells to have an infection. So 2 to 3 years maybe, and they have to live in this same environment. I just thought this was interesting. I don't care that you know this either, but chromosomes, the way chromosomes are, is there's a centromere, there's a P arm and a Q arm, and when it says it's a deletion, it's like 22, so that's chromosome number 22. So this is chromosome number 22, and it'll have an 11.5 deletion in the Q arm. So it's they just mark these with numbers according to some sort of standard, and there's a deletion at 11.5 in the Q arm of chromosome number 22. I don't care that you know that, I just thought maybe it was interesting too. So there's a deletion, and that deletion is what codes for the proteins that make the thymus as the neonate develops, as the baby develops. Okay, so tonsils. So our tonsils and adenoids are these little organs within our throat, and some people have had these removed, had their tonsils removed because they're chronically getting infected. So if they get a chronic infection in the tonsils, sometimes they'll just take the tonsils out, and we'll go over why we can live without them. So what the tonsils do is they activate and store white blood cells. So bone marrow. Bone marrow is a little funky too, which I love to learn about bone marrow and talk about it, but for example, you have flat bones, which I don't care that you know about it, and then you have long bones. So this is a terrible drawing of a bone. Let me draw like a femur. Okay, so here you have compact bone. So for example, this could be like the skull. This is a flat bone. So like the skull, the scapula, the pelvis. There's flat bones, and then there's long bones. And there's compact bone all around the outside of bones. And then on the inside, at the ends, here, and in here is bone marrow, is red bone marrow. And red bone marrow, what it is that is where all of our white blood cells are made. So all of our white blood cells are made in red bone marrow. And red bone marrow is in the ends of long bones and in the middle of flat bones. And so, for example, if somebody has to get a bone marrow transplant, what they're gonna do is they're going to stick a needle into the pelvis and extract bone marrow or put bone marrow in from a fresh donor. So what we're doing is we're adding more red bone marrow, healthy red bone marrow. And what red bone marrow is, they're stem cells. So we've talked a little bit about stem cells, and I'll talk more about them today. But they're stem cells, and remember stem cells, it sounds like a fancy word, and it's cool to learn about. Heck yeah, I think it's neat to understand what stem cells are and what they do. But what a stem cell is it's a cell that can go through mitosis and make another of itself. So say this is a cell, can make another one of itself, but it can also come and make another type of cell. So stem cells are cells that can copy themselves and can make a totally different cell type. Sometimes we call those mother cells, or we'll go over like plasticity and what that means, but it's a stem cell is the cell that can make a copy of itself through normal mitosis, or it can go through this funky method of developing a new cell type. So that's what is all in the red bone marrow are stem cells or mother cells. And so that's what makes our entire red blood cell line and our entire white blood cell line is those stem cells that are in red bone marrow. All of our platelets, erythrocytes, and all of our leukocytes are made from those stem cells. So you can see this picture of what it looks like. This is red bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow is just lipids, it's just fats, and those are in between, in the middle of long bones. But we just care about the red bone marrow because that's what makes our white blood cell line as well as our red blood cell line. Okay, so here I talked more about red bone marrow, but the red bone marrow, or for bone marrow, stands for B. This is where we talk about B cells, and B cells will mature. Even though all white blood cells and all red blood cells are made in the red bone marrow, B cells will mature in the bone marrow. That's why it stands for B. So we'll talk about maturity, T cell maturity in the thymus, B cell maturity in the bone marrow. We'll talk more about that later. So these stem cells here are called hemato, I know it's a long word, hematopoietic, is that right? Cells, or they're called stem cells. So hematopoietic cells, or sometimes they're called progenitors. So hematopoietic progenitor cells, progenitor means like mother, is like a fancier word for mother. Hematopoietic is the name of that. Hemato is like heme is blood. So it's the stem cell that makes all of the bloodline. So
you're saying
yeah.
it's not just any stem cell, it's specifically the
Yes.
stem cells for this situation.
Yes, hematopoietic stem cells are the stem cells that make the entire bloodline.
Okay.
Yeah, great. And I have a picture of that too. Okay, so another organ of the immune system is called associated lymph tissue. So associated lymph tissue is just tissue around the whole body that has a concentrated area of white blood cells. So the GALT, for example, there's GALT, there's SALT, there's MALT. I don't care that you know the difference between those and what they mean, but basically it's an associated lymph tissue. So like the gut associated lymph tissue is GALT, and what they are is they're just little patches of white blood cells. And if you can imagine how many white blood cells you might need in your intestines to deal with every single thing that you swallow. So all of your food, all of your water, all of your everything is full of pathogens. So how does our body get rid of all those? Well, it's because there's all these associated lymph tissues that will kill pathogens right on the spot locally. So the appendix, we never thought the appendix had any role. We didn't really know what the appendix did. And it's fairly new that we know the appendix is also a lymph tissue. There's white blood cells in there. Do we need it? No, we can live completely fine without it, but there's white blood cells. So there's all these different areas within the gut or other places like skin-associated lymph tissue or other areas. All it is just patches of area that contain white blood cells. Okay, so part of our organs of the immune system, which, you know, we don't really say organ, but our blood really, some people do say it's an organ because it's a collection of cells that perform the same function. But white blood cells are part of our organs of the immune system, and so we're going to learn about all of our white blood cells and what they do and what they are, what innate means, what adaptive means. We're going to go through all of that together, but our white blood cells are part of our organs of the immune system. So here's all of our white blood cells. You're going to know this very soon, but don't freak out because I will walk you through step by step of what they are and what they do. So I just wanted to throw that out there ahead of time, just so you know what's coming down the pipe, but here's a little blank one.
What does
I'm sorry, go ahead.
what does lineage mean? Is that just naming the stem cell or something?
Oh, yeah, great question. So I'll talk more about what lineage is. So the lineage is from the mother cell, from the progenitor, from the parent cell. Then they're gonna split off into different lines of how they're related, how they're correlated. So it's like in your own lineage, you have like people that are related to your mother, people that are related to your father. Well, that's how hematopoietic progenitor cells do, is like the progenitor cell, the mother cell, will give birth to two types of cells, and those two types of cells will give birth to other types of cells, and they're in different lines. And
So
the
are
reason-
those two types of cells also stem cells?
Yes, they're also stem cells.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. So, like, for example, I'll talk more about stem cells, but for example, like, where they talk about like embryonic stem cells. You know, embryonic stem cells have been like crazy in the news, and everybody's all upset about embryonic stem cells. Well, it's because those cells in the embryo, they're very potent. They can make any cell type. Where some, as they start developing, they lose potency. So like, if you took stem cells from, like, for example, from an adult and took some hematopoietic stem cells from the patient, then what you're doing is you can make all of the red blood cell line, but you can't make anything else. You can't make any other type of tissue, liver tissue, retinal tissue. You can't make any other type of tissue. You can only make the blood line. So I'll talk more about stem cells in a second. Okay. So here's a CBC. So I just wanted to give you this as an example. This is my CBC. So this was when I had my blood taken. And what they do is they're looking at all of your white blood cells and red blood cells. So here is a red blood cell is the amount of red blood cells versus the other types of cells, and like how healthy is your patient based on what is their red blood cell count, what is their hemoglobin count, and so we're looking at different things. But what we're gonna focus on is right here, is we're gonna look at our white blood cell count, and then here's the number of neutrophils, which we'll learn about what those are. The number of lymphocytes total, we haven't learned that word lymphocyte yet. Monocytes, eosinophils, we have heard about eosinophils, right? A little bit, that eosinophilia is common with helminth infection. Basophils, we'll learn about what all these cells are, and then it gives you a count of how many there are in the given blood sample. So we're gonna learn about these different types, but I thought that this was cool for you to see directly how you're gonna be able to look at what these white blood cells are and what they mean. So yeah, this was my CBC, and you can start reading it as we learn more about what the cells are and what they do. Here's a little definition terms from the CBC, if that helps you, if you want to look at that. I don't care that you know anything like that or know it or can read it. I just thought that it was good for you to be able to see what that is. And if your patient does have low white blood cells, what does that mean? If your patient has high white blood cells, what does that mean? Which white blood cell means something. Each white blood cell, you're like, oh, maybe my patient has this, maybe my patient has this, based on looking at the cell type individually. Okay, so we're gonna go through these terms together. So here I added leukocytes, I added hematopoietic stem cells, I added progenitor, but you can go through these, and I didn't put the definitions on here because I want you to try and go through these yourself as we go through. Try and see if you can understand what the definition is and maybe put it into one word or two words, but I can help you with them as we go along. So we're gonna talk about all these. Okay, so we're gonna, for the next two, Thursday and the next Tuesday, we're gonna talk about innate versus adaptive. So we have two types of immune systems, innate versus adaptive. So do you guys remember me talking about How you doing over there, girlfriend? Tired? Yeah, that's okay. So when you're making me tired, so the innate immune system versus the adaptive immune system is what we're gonna spend the next couple days talking about. And what they are is, do you remember me telling you that story about my friend whose kid, she is so allergic to peanut butter? Do you remember that story? So she went into full anaphylactic shock, full anaphylaxis, which we'll learn a little bit more about what that is, but her whole throat was swollen and she couldn't breathe within 30 seconds of being licked by her dog. So, because she's so allergic to peanut butter, and that is how potent our immune system is. Our immune system is so potent, it could kill you within 30 seconds. That's why it's also really important to be careful with our immune system too, and treat your immune system well. But like, for example, people with autoimmune diseases have a huge problem because how do you fight the immune system? The immune system is just beyond powerful. We don't really have a lot of options when we have an autoimmune disease. So like my husband, for example, who has alopecia, who I pick on him all the time, but his white blood cells see his hair follicles as foreign. So his white blood cells will fight his hair follicles. So he doesn't have facial hair at all, like no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and he doesn't have hair on his head. And then it's hit and miss, but like arm hair and leg hair is like hit and miss because his white blood cells see his hair follicles as something foreign. So it's like rheumatoid arthritis. So patients with rheumatoid arthritis, their white blood cells see their synovial pockets within their joints as foreign and will kill and attack those. I kind of got off track. So what my point was the innate versus adaptive. Our innate immune system is what helps us fight from the very beginning. Helps us kind of I'll tell you what the definition of innate is, but it's already primed, it's already ready to go. It's an immune system that will start fighting things off right away. But it's not very potent. It's not very strong. All it's really doing is trying to clear things and also trying to activate the adaptive immune system. So, for example, the little girl, her name's Kennedy. So what Kennedy did was, like, the first time she had peanut butter, she probably had a minor reaction, and she probably had a rash and maybe some swelling. And then the second time it got worse, and then the third time it got worse, and now it's so potent because of that adaptive immune system. So her adaptive immune system takes longer to prime, but our adaptive immunity is the reason we're alive. We have to have that adaptive immune system. Our innate immune system is not strong enough. But our adaptive immune system takes longer. It's specific, pathogen specific, and it needs time to become pathogen specific. So it needs time to recognize a specific pathogen and be able to attack that specific pathogen. Yeah?
So just to clarify, with that, when you say it needs time, do you mean like it needs just time, or does it need time after exposure? So exposure time.
Yes, after exposure.
So
yeah.
if she hasn't been exposed for 25 years and she was never exposed, but then all of a sudden she was exposed, it wouldn't be that bad.
No, if she waited for 20 years, they say some people will grow out of it, but that severe of a reaction, I'm guessing after 20 years that she still will have a reaction, and we'll figure out why. I'll show you why, and we can kind of see, like, those white blood cells are stored basically forever, but are our white blood cells really stored like forever? Like if somebody gets a vaccination against chickenpox, then they're not going to get chickenpox, but 20 years later they can get shingles, which is a version of the varicella zoster virus, because those cells died over time. But they are really, really long living cells, almost our entire lifetime, and some cells will live our entire lifetime. And what they do, which I didn't ask you about this either, but those cells, remember that interphase mitosis, it's like interphase, this is G1, this is S, this is G2. Cells will leave and go in this G0, this quiescent state, and they'll be stored for a long time, and they can live almost indefinitely. Okay, so innate, there's two branches of the innate immune system that we're gonna learn about next time. There's one branch of the adaptive immune system, kind of, and we'll figure out what all of these things are. We're gonna go through those piece by piece. So this is kind of from your book, but I changed it a little bit to make it a little bit better in my opinion. Okay, so here's another term, is called hematopoiesis. So hematopoiesis is a term for the birth of white and red blood cells, where the hematopoietic progenitor is the mother cell. Hematopoiesis is the action of making the cell itself. So here's the progenitor, the stem cell right here. It's usually in the ends of long bones, but it shows from the middle. But there's red bone marrow. In this, it's called trabecular bone or spongy bone, which I don't care that you know either. But there's red bone marrow. Here's a hematopoietic stem cell. This stem cell is going to give birth to two different types of cells. One is called a myeloid, one is called a lymphoid, and we'll learn more about what those are. So the myeloid and lymphoid, these are all stem cells. These are also stem cells, like Dr. Myers was saying. These are also stem cells. They can give birth to all these, and these ones can give birth to all of these. And then this is also a stem cell that can give birth to these two types. This one is a stem cell kind of that can give birth to platelets, but we don't care about that because we're not going to talk about erythrocytes in this class because those are red blood cells, and those, even though they do help us with our immune system, we don't really focus on those. We focus on our white blood cells. So we're going to learn about what eosinophils are, what basophils are, what monocytes, what macrophages and dendritic cells and neutrophils are, and what they do. And then we are going to learn about lymphocytes. So leukocytes are all white blood cells. Lymphocytes are B and T cells. So these are leukocytes as well, because they're all leukocytes, but these are specialized leukocytes that are called lymphocytes. The reason they're called lymphocytes is because they're from that lymphoid progenitor. So they're in the lymphoid lineage. These myeloid are in the myeloid lineage. So they separate. And it's kind of nice, actually, the way it works is because those lymphocytes versus the leukocytes, the lymphocytes versus the myeloid cells, one's an innate, so these are mostly innate cells, and these are mostly adaptive cells. So we get to kind of separate them in that way too. Innate, that we're going to learn on Thursday, adaptive, that we're going to learn next Tuesday. Okay, so leukocytes are all white blood cells, lymphocytes are specialized. We're not going to talk a ton about natural killer cells, we'll talk about them a little bit, but B cells and T cells are our main two lymphocytes that we think about and talk about a lot. They're very, very important. So let's talk about, I've talked a little bit about maturity versus activation. So white blood cells have a lot of checks and balances. So as I'm talking about checks and balances, I forgot to bring back up the organs of the immune system. So the organs of the immune system, we have like the spleen, lymph nodes, tonsils, associated lymph tissues. We have all of these organs that are to mature and activate white blood cells. So if you can think in your mind, like, why do we need so many? And we need so many because the immune system is so powerful. We have to have checks and balances. We have to have a backup plan and a backup plan and another backup plan and another backup plan. That's why the lymph nodes can be taken out and we'll be just fine, is because we have backup plans, backup plan, backup plan. Because our immune system is so powerful. Where else in like the body do we have repetitive things? You know, we don't usually make more than one thing or do something more than is needed. But that's how important the immune system is. Sorry, say that again?
We have 2 kidneys.
We have 2 kidneys, yes. Kidneys are extremely important. We do have a double dose of kidneys, yes. And then we have hundreds of lymph nodes because we need those. We need backup plans, and we need them more locally than in just one spot like the spleen. We need them all over the place because that's how much we're inundated with organisms all the time and other stuff. Okay, so we're going to talk about maturity versus activation. I don't think I'll talk about maturity very often. I'll just talk about it this once. So I might bring it up again, but I'll try not to. Because what maturity is, so it's almost like they have to be turned on twice. And the reason they have to be turned on twice is because it's another safety mechanism. It goes through so many safety checks. Our immune system goes through safety check after safety check after safety check to make sure that those white blood cells are not going to recognize one of our cells as foreign. So if our white blood cells recognize one of our own cells as foreign, we have all these mechanisms to kill that cell and make sure that cell is not going to survive. And then we have all of these checks and balances to make sure that only the ones that attack foreign pathogens or foreign invaders are going to be the ones that are going to survive. So we have a checks and balances system. We have to, yes, we need the world's most potent immune system to be able to fight off, but also we need the world's most potent immune system in check all the time. Because if you have an immune system that is unregulated, it's death. So like anaphylaxis is an example of that, or sepsis is an example of that, where the immune system is going unchecked, and so the immune system is actually what kills your patient. So maturity. So all of those cells that are born in the bone marrow, and then they travel, and they're born in the bone marrow, and then they travel and become mature somewhere else. But the only cell that doesn't mature somewhere else is the B cell. B cell matures in the bone marrow. T cell matures in the thymus. So all of those cells will leave in an immature state to where they can get to where they need to go, and then they'll stay there until they've matured, and that doesn't mean that they're activated. Activated means it's doing its job, it's killing. Maturity means it's just going to grow up. It's just going to become the cell that will actually be able to function. So, for example, there's this really cool story. I don't think I told you guys this story yet, but it's the book that I love so much. I can try and read a portion of it for you guys, but it's called The Emperor of All Maladies. Have I told you about it yet? It's such a good book. So if you guys ever get a chance to like listen to it on Audible, I know you guys don't have a lot of time for lazy reading, but it's such a good book, and it's about cancer. So he's an oncologist, and he works at Massachusetts General Hospital or Sydney Farber, somewhere in Boston, and super like up there oncologist, like doing the work to cure cancer, like all of the things. He's in that realm so much, but he wrote this huge book, and the book is about, as you move along in the book, he talks about his patients, but he also intersperses it with stories about cancer history, like the history of cancer, which I think is so interesting, about like in the times of the Egyptian times, and the first surgeries of breast cancer, when they were starting to do mastectomies without anesthesia and without antibiotics, and just, I mean, crazy stories, so cool, and like rich history, super neat. But he tells this story about his patient. So his patient was a middle-aged woman, mother, and she was feeling tired all the time. She's from the Midwest, and she's just feeling tired, and cannot figure it out. And eventually it got to where, and she went to see a doctor after doctor after doctor, what is wrong? And she eventually got to where she couldn't even get up off the floor. She's like, I'm not strong enough to put myself onto the couch from the floor. Like, she just could not. She was like, incontinent. She could not control anymore. So they were like, okay, we need to see the specialist. So they drove to Boston and got in to see the hospital there, and they took her blood, and her blood came out white. And what it was she had leukemia, and the whole time she had leukemia and they didn't know it. And because her hematopoietic progenitor cells were spitting out broken white blood cells, and these white blood cells weren't able to attack anything or do anything, and they weren't able to mature. And so that is what leukemia is leukemia from leukocytes. It's a cancer of the white blood cells. So she had immature white blood cells, so much so that it was taking over her red blood cells, and that her white blood cells weren't functioning to attack anything. So she just felt terrible, she goes through this whole story. I don't want to tell you too much about it because I want you to read the book, but he's her patient, and so he intersperses her story the whole time with, telling about how he goes into her room and what she's going through. At the same time, it tells the story about cancer. So it's a really neat story if you have a chance to hear about it. But immaturity in leukocytes is a bad thing unless it's controlled. It has to be controlled so that those cells, when they work right, they should go to their area wherever they normally reside, and then they'll become mature. And then when they're mature, then they can actually perform their function when they're triggered by some sort of pathogen. Then they can become activated to do their job. So we'll talk about what the activation is and what that does. So activation happens because of something called an antigen. So I'm sure you guys might have heard this term before. I don't know if you have or not, but an antigen is where that word came from, is antibody generator. And we don't know what an antibody is yet. We'll learn about what antibodies are and what they do. But an antigen is just a piece of something. So it can be actually, an antigen can be the bacteria itself, it can be the virus itself, it can be a protozoa, it can be a helminth, it can be a helminth egg, it can be whatever it is. But it also can be little tiny pieces of whatever has been broken up in the body. But also, for example, example of an antigen for Kennedy's sake was the molecules of a peanut. That's an antigen to her. People who have allergies, it's ragweed or whatever is the antigen to them, can be something that triggers the immune system. So an antigen is anything that triggers the immune system, and they'll activate white blood cells to perform their function. So if there's something specific, our body has to recognize it as foreign and then turn on those white blood cells. So then here's a couple of funky terms that will just bear with me, and they'll make more sense as we go along. But these are called pattern recognition receptors. So pattern recognition receptors are PRRs. And this is just a broad term for any kind of cell that recognizes a pattern. So we have these things, I have a slide on it, but we have these things called receptors. So on every cell in your body, there's tons and tons and tons and tons of receptors. So when you get into cell bio, if you ever take cell bio, it's a super interesting class, but you learn all kinds about receptors and what they do and what they're doing. Because really, if you think about the cell, every single cell in our body as like its own individual unit with organelles, if you think of it like we have organs, the cell functions as its own unit with its own little organelles. But the cell doesn't have a way to communicate. It can't talk, it can't listen, it can't know, oh, there's food over there, go there. Oh, there's something going on in the body, fix it, do something. There's no way to communicate. So they communicate by these things called receptors. So these receptors tell the cell what's going on in the outside world. So if there's a PRR, pattern recognition receptor, on some type of white blood cell, it means that it can read some sort of pathogen. So some antigen. Remember, an antigen is just a piece of a pathogen. We'll just say pathogens for the sake of ease, because sometimes that can be peanuts, sometimes it can be anything. It can be dust or whatever it is. But we'll just call it a piece of a bacteria. So if this piece of bacteria has to be recognized by this pattern recognition receptor. So it's a receptor that recognizes a pattern specific to a certain antigen or pathogen. So what these are called, they're called, on the next slide, is called PAMPs. So PAMPs, what those are pathogen-associated molecular patterns. So how does our body know that it's a pathogen and not a bacteria, or not a cell? So that's part of the problem with like cancer. I'll give you the example of cancer. Cancer is so hard for our bodies to recognize because they are our own cells. They're our own cells. How does our body know to fight off broken cancer cells? Because they're our own cells. They're our own. If there's a white blood cell that has matured and activated against our own cells, that cell we have mechanisms that will kill that cell because we don't want to recognize self, but we want to recognize non-self. How we recognize non-self are these things called pathogen-associated molecular patterns. So our body knows, because we've been inundated since the second we were born, and even in utero, because we've been primed to know what is self and what is non-self, because these antigens have molecular patterns that are common to things that are foreign and not us. So that's just a couple of terms I just wanted to throw out there. You'll see that in the literature here and there. I've heard about it in the news and stuff like that. Yeah.
This is sort of a broad question, but is it that our cells have a specific pattern that they recognize, or do they pick up on individual patterns from individual foreign things, like different bacteria, different viruses?
I'm sorry, you're asking a good question, but I think I'm getting it. I just want to make sure I'm answering it directly with what you're saying. Say it one more time.
Just the receptors, you said that they recognize individual foreign things. I was just wondering, like, do they recognize individual foreign things, like, one by one? Like, it knows that bacteria have a certain shape, or viruses have a certain shape or something? Or does it know what our cell's shape is and look for that?
So our cells, it's because of like for example, there's a cancer cell. So like this is a cancer cell that's been floating around, and there's a protein pattern on the outside. Remember, these are phospholipids on the outside of our cells. But then there's these little things called proteins. I mean, there's these little proteins that are like receptors and all that kind of stuff. And so if this meets up with this PRR, then it won't trigger this cell to do anything about it. But if this is a virus, and this virus has a spike protein, and that spike protein has this amino acid sequence that's a PAMP, then the receptor will recognize that.
That's what yeah, I got it. Right.
Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, so like it is our shape, but then also there are things that can impersonate our shape.
Yeah, it's more like, I would say broadly, it's an amino acid sequence that our bodies don't create.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of. Okay. Yeah.
Just to confirm, the PAMP is the pattern of the antigen, and then PRR is the pattern of the receptor.
Yes. So this is the pathogen. This is the human cell.
Right.
Yes.
So the PAMP is what the pathogen looks like, and the PRR is going to be the receptor that's recepting PAMP.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
The P in PAMP is just for foreign antigens.
Yes. Pathogen associated molecular pattern. Yes. Yes. Awesome. Yeah. Good. Did you have a question?
that was nice.
Oh. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can we think of pattern as like the shape of the molecule?
It can be shape, but it's more chemistry. It's like the amino acid sequence that it recognizes because of it can be shape, but like how the proteins are formed, that the chemistry together, like
But it has
leucine,
to
leucine,
connect
leucine.
to the PAMP has to connect to the
Yes.
PRR, so it's like
Has to
their shapes
recognize it.
have to work together.
Yes, yeah, and mostly their chemistry has to work together, but yes, shape too.
Both.
Yeah,
Okay.
awesome. Okay, so let's move on. So the only reason I wanted to bring this up is because this will make sense to you as we talk about it later, but there's damage cell associated molecular patterns that are called DAMPs. And so if this cell is damaged, then this cell might recognize it and it might not, depending on how damaged the cell is or what is going on with that cell. So damaged cell associated molecular patterns. And I don't care, well, I'm gonna talk more about this when we talk about I don't wanna go there yet. Sometimes broken cells can trigger the immune system as well. But the best thing is not to trigger the immune system. Broken cells, the best thing to happen with the broken cell is to go through the lymph and be done. But our cells do sometimes recognize cancer cells, and our bodies can get rid of cancer cells with the immune system if there's a DAMP. Okay, so this is this is only like a 1/1000th of what we know. There are so many receptors on cells that we don't know a lot of them. We don't really know everything the cell does yet. We're still learning about all the things that a cell does. We're still learning about everything that a cell responds to and how it functions. But if you think of one receptor, I just wanted to like blow your mind for a minute of that there's thousands. And these receptors all have a different job to see how much glucose is in the environment, how much sodium is in the environment, how much, and they all each have their own individual task. And then one other thing I just want to say about that is that a lot of times we will identify cells based on receptors. So because we can put it, it's called a fax machine. It's a fluorescent cell sorter. And what it does is it'll take cells depending on the receptors and label them a certain color and put them in one test tube, and then it'll take another cell that has a different type of receptor and color it and put it in a different test tube, and then we can see how many cells there are or what those cells are doing. So it's how we identify cells also. So for example, like these are like toll-like receptors, those are called, let me see, we would label this one, there's like CR1, I don't know what we would label this cell as. So if there's a unique receptor, then that unique receptor is usually what we call that cell by. So for example, we're gonna learn about T cells. T cells, there are two types. You don't have to know this yet. We're gonna learn about it on Thursday. But a T cell has it has more than two, but we're only gonna learn about two. We're gonna learn about one that's called a CD4 T cell, and we're gonna learn about one that's called a CD8 T cell. And what those are receptors. This one has a receptor that looks like an 8, that has the same amino acid structure as all CD8 cells. This one has a receptor that we call CD4. So that's sometimes, I just wanted to let you know, receptors are crazy. There's so many of them. Sometimes we identify cells in that way. Okay, stem cells. So I just wanted to bring up a couple of, I just want you to know what a stem cell is. I don't care that you know any of this, but I just wanted to bring up what a stem cell is, just for your future knowledge base. That stem cells, just like Dr. Myers was saying, was some stem cells can give rise to all kinds of different cell types. And some stem cells can only give rise to 1 or 2 or something like that. So we call that potency. A stem cell that's very, very potent is a stem cell that we, like, if people get stem cell injections. And in this country, we don't use embryonic stem cells because it's against the law. But a lot of people, for example, my sister did this, went to Panama. And in Panama, she got a stem cell injection in her ankle because she has ankle issues from running. And so she got a stem cell injection, and it was an embryonic stem cell injection because they're more potent, but we don't do that in this country. Yeah.
What's like the difference between totipotent
Yeah, great question. So totipotent is, I just put totally potent just because that's silly, but it sounds like it. But totipotent, what that means is it can create the most types of cells. So that we only have a few totipotent cells. We have many pluripotent cells or multipotent cells. So you're moving down in potency. So potency means, let me show you a picture of this. So when an egg and a sperm meet, then those egg and the sperm their chromosomes will combine, and then our DNA polymerases will start copying the genome of the two chromosomes. And so when they start copying the genome, then they start forming these cells. These cells, it's called the inner cell mass. I don't care that you know about that either. I just am giving you information because I think it's cool. But this is called the inner cell mass, or it's called the ICM. So what happens is this is a brand new fertilized cell, and there's these clumps of cells, and that's where we get embryonic stem cells, is from a brand new fertilized egg. So the reason that, you can form your own conclusions about when life begins or things like that, but for example, in vitro fertilization, people will make tons of these and keep them in a freezer and get rid of them when they're done using them, or they don't want them. But that's kind of the issue also, is that people are like, no, we don't want you to use these stem cells because they could potentially make a child. So that's beyond the scope of this class, is your own philosophical beliefs, but this inner cell mass, these are all totipotent cells. So those are the cell types that can form hearts and lungs and brains and livers and kidneys and things like that. But then as those cells start dividing through time, they won't ever move backwards. They won't move back to totipotency. Then they become pluripotent, then they become multipotent, and then they can only make one cell type or two cell types depending on, yeah.
Does that mean that embryonic is the only totipotent?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
How do they get them to differentiate the cells that they want?
Oh, fantastic question. So this is cool if you ever work in a stem cell lab, then you can do, you upregulate genes that are called like OCT4 genes. There's different genes that you can upregulate that will cause those cells to, we can, that's not really quite right. So what they do is, for example, you could take some of these cells from the inner cell mass and put them in, like my sister's ankle, for example, and because of the chemistry around that area, they'll become whatever is there. So they'll become those cells of like they'll become muscle cells, or they'll become, they're triggered also by injury. So sometimes it helps in an injury situation so that they can become those cell types. I don't know, I'm not really helping you very much, but they become whatever they're around, whatever cell type they're around. But also you can get them to do something by turning genes on and off. Yeah.
So I'm curious, did that make any difference in your sister's foot?
She was having chronic knee issues, and she was having chronic ankle issues, and her knee, it did work, and her ankle, it did not. But she just told me this morning that she's been running again without pain. So I'm like, well, maybe it did, I don't know, because she got it years ago, but they do say sometimes it'll take 1-2 years for those cells, it's like triggering those cells to start healing and dividing. And so yeah, I think it's really cool. Does anybody have any other things about that? I think stem cell biology is really interesting. I think it's really neat. But the most I want you to know about stem cells is that the one, I want you to know the hematopoietic progenitor cells. So I do want you to know what that term means. So what that hematopoietic cell means, and what the progenitor, what that means. I want you to know what a stem cell is, but more than that, that's it. Yeah.
So what are like the potential benefits from getting a stem cell injection? Just
Yeah, so what they do is like, if, for example, like my sister, she has a tear in her tendon. So if she gets an injection, it's like a tendon below her ankle. If she gets an injection of stem cells, then hypothetically those stem cells are going to implant into that area and start producing like tendon and ligaments, like cells that make the tendons and ligaments. And so, yeah, without getting too crazy complicated, but basically what they're doing is they're setting up shop and then producing the like cells that make tendons and ligaments. That kind of
So they go from
Okay.
being totipotent to maybe multipotent?
Yeah, so then they'll start, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, it has a lot of potential. You know, that's why it's such a huge thing in our environment, in our world, why it's so much in the news. You know, for people that have Huntington's and people that have diabetes, absolutely.
Regrow
Yeah.
pancreas.
Yes, to get some islet cell production, like things like that. They're working on stem cells therapy for so many different things. So, yeah, if you're ever interested in working in a stem cell lab, it's a cool place to work. Okay, so MHCs, we're almost done, but I have to get through what an MHC is. So this is a major histocompatibility complex, or MHC. So major histocompatibility complexes, what they are is this is a way that our white blood cells are able to tell self from non-self. So what it is like this receptor. So let me give you another example. We'll come back to the PRRs and PAMPs later on. Let me give you another example. So you have a white blood cell. So here's a epithelial cell. And this epithelial cell has a receptor on it. Then you have a white blood cell, like I showed you those neutrophils, you know, that move around and start attacking things. It was a bacteria, that it was chasing a bacteria, and it caught the bacteria and gobbled it up. So this white blood cell, how it's going to know that this cell, how it knows not to gobble this cell up, is because it has these receptors called MHC1s. MHC1, almost every single cell in our body has MHC1s. You can just go ahead and say all of them. Well, the only ones that don't are red blood cells, but they have a different mechanism. Every single cell in your body has the most important, now you know the difference between MHC1 and MHC2. 1 is more important than 2. MHC1 is what all of our cells have. All of our cells have MHC1. And that's how our white blood cells know not to attack and kill this cell. But MHC2 are only a certain types of cells, and there's only a few that have an MHC2. And those are the professionals, which we'll talk about next time. We'll talk about what a professional cell is. But those are only special ones, have these major histocompatibility complex 2. And those are only special types of cells, and we'll talk about what they do. But MHC1, all of our cells have MHC1. That's how our white blood cells know not to attack it. So I have a MHC1 here, I have a MHC2. We'll talk more about that. Don't stress about it for now. This talks about what unprofessional antigen presentation is. I'll talk more about that next time. I'll talk more about professional antigen presentation, what that is next time. And that's it. So I'll talk more about that. I want to get into it, so I want to make sure that you guys understand that. Yeah?
Is there a fear that certain pathogens can develop the MHC1 receptor?
You know, that is really super interesting. I was just reading an article on that the other day. What some viruses do, which is so nuts, is some viruses will pull, because of their that they come with an enzyme or something like that. I don't really know very much about it, but that enzyme can what it does is trigger our own cells to swallow, to phagocytose our own MHC1s. So now our white blood cells won't be able to recognize it because this is going to, I'll tell you what about it, because what it does is it alerts the white blood cells that there's a virus. So it takes the white blood cells so it doesn't alert that there's a virus inside of it. Yeah, but also, yes, if there is a virus that does have MHC1 capabilities, that is very dangerous. They are looking into that. There's research on it. Super cool. Okay, so let's do our note card, and then you guys can go and start working on your unknowns. Okay, so we only have 2 more note cards, and then we're done. Yeah.
Are those ascaris or whipworms?
Mm-hmm. Those are ascaris.
How come they look like whipworms?
I don't know if they just curl up like that.
Okay.
Ascaris curl, and what they usually do is like lay them out.
Okay.
But you know, worms kind of do that. Like when you pick them up in the garden, they do the, yeah. So those are Ascaris lumbricoides. So let's say that 3 times. Ascaris lumbricoides.
Ascaris lumbricoides.
Ascaris lumbricoides. Last one, Ascaris lumbricoides. Ascaris lumbricoides. We haven't been doing that lately. Have you guys been confused about how to say some stuff? Tell me if you guys need help with any kind of pronunciation. I think it's always good to just know how to say it. So these obviously are nematodes. We know a lot about Ascaris already, so it should be kind of reviewish. Oh, here's the disgusting picture of somebody with an Ascaris infection. Ugh. So bad. So hungry now. A billion people worldwide? So it should say fecal, oral, and foodborne, but it doesn't, so just put your own foodborne. And remember, foodborne, generally, if it's a foodborne, at one point in its life, it had to burrow. One thing I wanted to mention really quickly is that the last day to drop with a W is November 19th. If you think you're going to get a D or an F, or if you think you're going to get a C and you can't have a C because of your future plans, then please come talk to me. I can help give you an idea. If you think you might get a C, then maybe help you with how to get an A or a B, or give you an alternative to getting an A or a B, so come and see me. If you feel like you're going to get a D or an F, a W might be a better idea. So a W means withdrawal. I have 2-3 W's on my transcripts. They're not bad at all. They just mean that you tried to take the class and you got overwhelmed or whatever, something came up and you had to drop. So I would highly recommend taking a W over taking a D or an F. But if you feel like you're gonna get a C and you cannot get a C, then please let me know also. But if you are in a place of getting a C, D, or F, and you can't get a C, D, or F, then please come and talk to me, and I can see like how realistic is it for you to be able to pull your grade up, Or if you don't feel like you can pull your grade up, what plan B is.